Secrets and Spies presents Espresso Martini with Chris Carr and Matt Fulton. Hello everybody and welcome to Espresso Martini. Today we have another jam-packed episode. Before we kind of go into what we're going to be talking about, Matt, how are you doing?
Oh, trying to sort of resist the lure of slipping into some like twilight fugue state for a good short while. But other than that, I'm good. Chris, how are you?
Well, yeah, I don't know what the word is to describe it. I'm lucky, obviously, because I'm this side of the Atlantic, but watching events kind of going on are quite concerning. So I think I'm just in a permanently concerned state of mind at the moment. So, and just doing my best to stay productive about it rather than kind of letting it kind of take you off into a depressive state or something. So I'm just trying my best to look after my personal health, etc. So yeah.
Very important. Very important to go touch grass sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. And I had a lovely walk this morning, actually, before this that really did me a lot of good. So, so good advice to everybody, actually. Just make sure you're looking after yourselves because, there's no point letting world events make you ill. It really isn't worth it. So, stay healthy out there. So on today's podcast, we will be looking at how the Potomac air crash shines a light on doomsday plans. So a nice cheery start there. Then we'll be looking at Trump's planned purge of the FBI. Then we've got Russia reportedly refusing Assad extradition to Syria. And then we'll be looking at the fears of Iran seeking to build a new nuclear weapon. So yes, we definitely have quite a heavy-going episode going forward. Yeah, so make sure you get yourself a nice drink. I'm having a nice latte. Don't necessarily turn to alcohol. Turn to something whatever your kind of comfort drink is.
There is just coffee in here, I swear.
Yeah.
I swear that's it.
Well, cheers. So we'll move on to the mid-air collision, which was obviously a horrific turn of events that happened on the 30th, wasn't it? So it was
it was about a week ago.
Yeah.
A week ago, it was last Wednesday.
Yeah, last Wednesday. So Matt, I'll hand this one over to you.
Yeah, so there's a really great article by Joseph Trevithick in the War Zone that details some of the details behind the unit that was involved in this. So the crew of the U.S. Army Black Hawk involved in last week's mid-air collision over the Potomac River with American Airlines Flight 5342, killing all 67 aboard. Both aircraft were conducting a training exercise for their unit's little-known continuity of government mission. Part of the 12th Aviation Battalion stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, the unit plays a key role in emergency government evacuation scenarios, tasked with transporting senior officials and lawmakers from sites like the White House and the Pentagon to secure locations such as Camp David, Mount Weather, and Raven Rock in the event of a crisis. This mission is not widely publicized, but remains a crucial component of national security. Other military units with COG responsibilities include the U.S. Air Force's 1st Helicopter Squadron and Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, or HMX-1, which primarily transports the president, but would also respond in a crisis. Civilian agencies such as the U.S. Park Police also contribute to emergency airlift operations. The incident raises questions about airspace safety around Washington, one of the most monitored and restricted flight zones in the country. The military must now assess the potential changes to training protocols while ensuring readiness for high-risk evacuation scenarios. Chris, what do you think about this one?
Well, God, what a disaster this was. I mean, like everybody, I was deeply shocked and saddened to hear about this crash, and I could not really think of anything worse than being moments away from landing and having this happen. I always takeoff and landing are probably the most dangerous phases of flying. And so this sort of collision, which is what it looks like between, with the military helicopter sort of flying into the path of the plane, it was appalling. So with regards to military helicopters, in their sort of, basically these kind of training missions are sort of standard stuff, really, because the helicopter pilots, especially military ones, need to be able to fly through controlled airspace. It's essential stuff, really, being able to sort of work with other air traffic, especially if there is this sort of doomsday scenario, I was sort of thinking about this morning, is what is the protocol for other aircraft should we, be 7 minutes away from a nuclear attack on the capital and you've got to get VIPs out? What happens? Because there's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of air traffic kind of floating about still.
Yeah.
Do they land? Do they stay as they are? What do they do? I don't know. But that intrigued me. But yeah, in the UK, we also have like RAF helicopters sort of doing a similar-ish thing along the River Thames, at least twice a week. They tend to sort of fly through London following the Thames. And again, those helicopter pilots are training to fly in controlled airspace because obviously London is controlled airspace. They tend to do that later in the evening, usually about 11 p.m. to sort of 1 a.m., which is, I'm assuming, when air traffic is sort of at a lesser level in London. So yeah, it's sort of interesting that they do that. Then that made me wonder about what's the UK's kind of doomsday scenario, and I couldn't really find much information about what our actual doomsday scenario is. So I apologise to listeners because I was hoping to have some sort of better idea of what happens. But what I have discovered is the Ministry of Defence have a bunker called Pindar, Pindar, which can hold up to 400 personnel, and it provides protection against conventional bombing, sabotage, biological and chemical attack, flooding, and the effects of blast radiation, and also it protects against electromagnetic pulses, but it will not survive a direct hit or a very near miss by nuclear weapons. So this bunker has sort of its limitations. It is directly connected to Downing Street and the cabinet offices via a special tunnel. Pindar has 2 floors. The lower floor contains the Ministry of Defence Joint Operations Centre, and then the upper floor consists of government emergency rooms comprising the Prime Minister's, Secretary of State, the Cabinet Secretary, and some permanent secretaries. And then you've also got an element of the Joint Intelligence Organisation, and then you've got sort of telecommunications center as well, which is known as COMCEN, which is Cabinet Office Communications Center. So that's where, in London, should something happen, most members of senior political leadership are going to go in there. But with that terrible accident in DC, it was 67 people were killed. And as I was saying, it kind of appears the helicopter flew into the path of the airliner that was landing. Obviously, how that happened and why that happened is still being investigated.
Yeah.
But from my understanding, the helicopter pilots were challenged twice, and they took responsibility for something known as visual separation, which is where they claim they can see where the aircraft in question is, and they will maintain distance away from it. And it sounds like that they may have got confused about which aircraft they were looking at. But again, that's still kind of unconfirmed at this point. The other thing that was interesting as well, there have been reports of near misses before at the airport, at Ronald Reagan Airport. And so there's a helicopter corridor, which is known as Route 4. It allows helicopters to fly as low as 200 feet in that corridor, and it's only got kind of a 15-foot kind of gap between the corridor for aeroplanes and for helicopters, which is quite frankly crazy. Usually have a few hundred feet gap. So the way air control spaces work is basically based on height. So you have these sort of areas that you can operate at certain heights. So slow moving aircraft will be restricted on how high or low they can go near an airport. But having aircraft flying across what would be a runway, that's a recipe for disaster, and sadly, that's what's happened. So, yeah, I mean, Matt, I obviously I've sort of taken it a little bit away from what the article's about, but what were your thoughts on this terrible event?
Yeah, well, that's it's really crowded airspace there along the Potomac. It's as you said, DC is one of the most closely controlled and monitored sections of airspace in the world. The whole area around the city, air traffic's allowed in to some extent. Like commercial aviation coming into DCA, Reagan National, and Dulles. You have to have a reason to be there. You have to identify yourself on radio, remain on radio. There are none of this is classified. It's all on.
Mm.
It's accessible to anybody with Google and enough time on their hands. There's this Army aviation unit The battalion, the 12th Aviation Battalion, sits under the Joint Task Force National Capital Region, which is itself under U.S. Northern Command, and that's sort of a joint headquarters for with all the service branches. So
Yeah.
the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, Coast Guard have some presence there too. Yeah, there's a few different aviation units around DC that handle continuity of government. So the Army is 12th Aviation Battalion. The Air Force has the 1st Helicopter Squadron. They're at Joint Base Andrews. The Customs and Border Protection also has some aircraft in Manassas. There's a squadron under NORAD that is at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, which is right along the Potomac. Essentially, like this collision happened like kind of directly in front of that base. NORAD has a squadron there that operates something called the Joint Air Defense Operations Center, and they oversee a collection of 6 air defense batteries that are stationed at different locations in and around DC. I won't say exactly where they are on the air. When we were walking around DC in November, I pointed out one of them to you as we were walking around, and if you didn't know it was up there as you walk past, you would never know that it was there.
Mm.
That's been present since shortly after 9/11 was when they put those in. But yeah, so this crew on the H-60 Blackhawk was on a routine training exercise at the time of the collision. It was, as according to the war zone here, was connected to their continuity of government mission. So I guess the sort of normal side of their mission is to transport VIPs around DC. And then on top of that, they had this continuity of government mission that they train for. So in the event of some sort of a crisis, where national leadership, congressional leadership, federal leadership, military leadership would have to be evacuated out of DC to places like FEMA's Mount Weather, that's in Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Joint Staff and the DoD have their alternate National Military Command Center, and the emergency operations centers for all the service branches are at Raven Rock. That's near Camp David, just across the state line in Pennsylvania. There's a few other smaller locations dotted in the area around DC. Some of them are under commercial cover, supposedly. But when that alert goes out, there's a whole bunch of designated people in government, and they train and drill for this stuff as well. And they know to report to kind of designated marshaling points all around the city, such as the soccer fields at American University in Northwest DC, and a helicopter's going to come and pick them up and whisk them off to elsewhere. So these it's a very elite unit, the 12th Aviation Battalion, and they train to do these evacuations in a whole bunch of really nasty conditions. If you consider what the situation might be if you had to evacuate DC in a hurry, such as perhaps evacuating DC while there's a power outage. So the crew, we know it was reported by the DoD, were wearing night vision goggles at the time of this collision. I'm not sure if that played any kind of a role. And to be clear here, NTSB is going to do their investigation. They're going to figure out what happened. We don't know what happened. We're not pilots. Yeah, it's really unfortunate thing. It's the deadliest civil aviation disaster in the U.S. Well, it's the first major one since 2009. There was a regional commuter jet that crashed in Buffalo. I think it was weather related. And then before that, this is the deadliest one since it was another American Airlines flight that crashed in November 2001 after a departure from JFK.
Yeah, and there was a big one in the 80s. There was a big one in the 80s that hit the bridge, one of the bridges at the Potomac.
I think it was a Wilson, or no, the Memorial Bridge. I think the Arlington Memorial Bridge.
And it
I
was
believe it was that one. Yeah,
something to do with came from Miami or something, that flight, and I think
it was
that's
Air Florida. Yeah,
Air Florida. Yeah.
they're defunct now, but yeah, my cousin is a commercial pilot, and has some experience flying for one of the bigger airlines here in the U.S., flying aircraft about the same size as the CRJ that crashed. So we're not pilots. Like, I kind of know, the military, the cog side of things, but as far as the civil aviation side of it, I don't know. But I spoke with him yesterday just to pick his brain a bit, knowing we were going to talk about it here. Um, just get his,
Mm.
sense of it. He told me a couple interesting things. So that corridor that the Black Hawk was in, as you said, it was following down, it's called Route 1, which begins up around Langley, Virginia, sort of like right by CIA headquarters, and then follows the Potomac down south towards DC. And then as you get sort of more into DC proper, like around the Pentagon, the mall, the route sort of diverts off from over the Pentagon, from over the Potomac, around the tidal basin, like where the Jefferson Memorial is, and it comes around, like, it's called Washington Channel right there. So it deconflicts away from the runways where DCA is right there, where you have, aircraft coming in and taking off and landing. The ceiling there in that area, the altitude ceiling is 200 feet. It was reported a bit, right after this crash that the helicopter was supposedly around 300 feet.
So it gone
And
too high.
we were talking about that, and he said, as far as that aviation as far as that altitude is concerned, under no circumstances, no matter what your altitude is, no matter how low you are, you would never cross in front of an airliner, descending airliner coming in on
Yeah.
final approach.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
seems like, and again, I'm not casting blame on anybody. We don't know, but it seems like, listening to the air traffic controllers, that this, helo was coming in, the CRJ, the regional jet was coming in from the other location, and the Black Hawk pilot, was talking with the controller, and the controller said, "Hey, do you see that CRJ right there? Pass behind it." And the pilot said, "Okay, we'll go, we'll do." Um, so that should clear the controller, the tower. And, there's, on top of that, there's it's been a chronic issue here in the FAA for years of air traffic controllers being short-staffed, overworked. They were down one staff in the tower at the time of the crash. But like my cousin said, I mean, yeah, they were down one person, but, each of them were doing jobs for, like, 3 or 4 people. I mean, you're really, like, one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Mm.
Um, but it seems like at that time that, when the controller says, "Did you see that CRJ there pass behind it?" And the pilot said, "Yes." There was another aircraft approaching into the runway 1, which is a bit farther south along the river. And it's possible that the pilot said yes, looking at that next aircraft,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
didn't see the CRJ coming in a lot closer. The other thing to consider is, so the TCAS system on the CRJ, the traffic and collision avoidance system, right? It's an automated system, and my cousin was saying, like, that system has saved his life a couple times. And no matter what altitude you're at, like, your stuff at, like, under 1,000 feet, it doesn't respond quite as well. He says, no matter what altitude you're at, it should have been squawking in that cockpit of that airliner saying, climb, climb, climb. So big open question for him, he told me, was, what happened with that TCAS system? Was active? Did it, and that's something, again, that we'll get the answer to. The other question that I had was with the night vision goggles that the crew on the Black Hawk
And the peripheral vision and things, yeah.
wearing. Well, that's the thing. Um, I don't know if there's any of you folks listening who may perhaps have an Army aviation background or would know the answer to this. I would love to hear what you guys think. Is a is it standard procedure for um, a crew to wear night vision goggles at night in a non-combat setting over like DC where the whole city's like lit up? Um, does that, like you said, with your peripheral vision, with the visibility of all that, kind of ambient light and the regular light that's on the ground coming up in your face, does that does that have any, harmful impact on your visibility? And so, where is it? So, yeah, my question there is it a standard procedure for the Black Hawk pilots to wear night vision goggles at any time when they're flying at night? Or was that something specifically because they were doing this continuity of government training exercise when you would be, training for a situation such as like DC had no power when all the lights were out, right? That's something that's an open question that I have. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, also in that doomsday scenario, if it is rockets coming in, DC would still technically be operating as per normal until the impact. So they would have to fly through air traffic and through dazzling light, etc., with night vision goggles. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of different questions that you could ask about the scenario. I mean, those were the two things from my conversation with him yesterday. Those were the two kind of questions that stuck out for him. The TCAS system. What was up with that?
mm,
And then was the night vision goggles some sort of a detrimental effect there? But I mean, it's all anytime one of these accidents happen, and they still are exceedingly rare if you
yes,
consider the sheer number of flights that are up every single day, not just in the US, but all over the world. And like the overwhelming majority of them, almost always, take off and land and get to where they're supposed to go without any issues. It's a miracle that it's as safe and as, uneventful as it often
yeah,
is.
let's hope it stays that way. Yeah,
Yeah. When it Yeah, and, when one of these accidents happen, it's almost always some kind of a domino effect, It's like it's a couple things that go wrong a certain way, and that leads to some kind of a catastrophic outcome, And so, like, when for a commercial airline pilot, they kinda drill into you, and it's definitely true with these,
mm,
Army Black Hawk pilots too, that, when you for the airline pilots, when you leave your hotel and you're about to, go to this flight, you have a very kind of set procedure routine of what you're supposed to do. And if anything, any little thing in that chain deviates from that standard procedure, stop, fix it, consider what you're doing. And that's how you get home at the end of the day. And so we'll find out what happened here.
yeah. I mean, as to your thoughts on aviation being safe, I mean, just put it into perspective, more people die in road accidents every year than probably in the
Oh yeah.
whole of aviation.
Oh
The
yeah.
only thing of aviation, obviously, it's more dramatic and more people die in a single moment and there's catastrophe. But yeah, generally more people die per year on the cars, and driving is much less regulated to in comparison to aviation. So I mean, aviation, you have an engineer check the plane before it goes. You've got air traffic control helping you. You've got then heavily trained pilots. You have medicals I think they have one every year, don't they, or every 5 years to check their health. Maybe if we did that more for drivers, we might have less accidents on the road. But there we go.
Yeah.
But there we go.
Yep.
Well, thank you for bringing that one up. I mean, it was a horrendous event that we saw last week, and I did want to have a brief chat about it, and I'm glad we have had an opportunity to do that because it was just, yeah, it was terrible. It really was. And my thoughts really go out to the families of everybody involved. And there was a video of one of the air stewards, and he seemed like a really positive guy who was always trying to make passengers feel at their best before they left the plane. And he's one of the many people who were tragically killed that day. So yeah, terrible events, and may it always be a very rare occurrence when something like this happens.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to our next story. It's all about FBI agents are stunned by the scale of the expected Trump purge. And this is by Shane Harris, who's a friend of the podcast, writing for The Atlantic. Yeah. So, just a quick summary. So, President Trump is expected to fire potentially hundreds of FBI agents and officials in investigations that led to criminal charges against him, including those who worked on the classified documents case. David Sundberg, head of the FBI's Washington field office, is among those set to be dismissed, raising concerns about the impact on national security and counterintelligence cases. Trump's administration is reviewing FBI personnel records to identify and potentially dismiss agents involved in investigating and prosecuting those responsible for the January 6th Capitol attack. No previous president has enacted such a large-scale purge of the FBI. While Trump's retribution was expected, officials are shocked by its scale, and legal challenges are likely due to civil protections. Trump's nominee for the FBI director, Kash Patel, and his nominee for Attorney General, Pam Bondi, had assured lawmakers that political retribution against law enforcement officials would not occur, contradicting the reported mass firings. So, Matt, this has obviously been, I think, one of the big stories of this week with regards to, law enforcement. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, so just to underscore here, this is a very fast-moving, fluid situation. We're recording this on Thursday the 6th. This will be out the following Saturday. So by the time, this airs, who knows? Um, Pam Bondi was confirmed by the Senate and took her oath, was sworn in as Attorney General
Hmm.
last night, I believe. So she's in place now. Yesterday, though, on Wednesday, the acting Attorney General, the acting Deputy Attorney General, the acting DAG, Emil Bove, sent a message to the Bureau's workforce and said, "Let me be clear: no FBI employee who simply followed orders and carried out their duties in an ethical manner with respect to January 6th investigations is at risk of termination or other penalties." And later goes on that only those who acted with corrupt or partisan intent, who blatantly defied orders or from department leadership, or who exercised discretion in weaponizing the FBI. So make of that what you will.
Bit open to interpretation, that, but yeah.
Yes, that's sort of where I was going. There's no reason to take them at their word. But this all, I think, hinges on what they mean by an ethical manner and a corrupt partisan intent. I'm not sure right now we're all operating with the same definition of those things. I've been sort of surprised, happily surprised these days, which doesn't happen often. The kind of pushback a bit, sort of quiet, dignified, bureaucratic-ish resistance that sort of we're seeing from within the Bureau, from the Agents Association, sort of like their employees union, and the acting leadership put in place after the inauguration. So right now the acting director is Brian Driscoll, who was only appointed SAC, or Special Agent in Charge of the Newark field office in New Jersey in the middle of January. I think it was one of the last things that Christopher Wray did before he stepped down. So he was, named by the incoming administration as acting director. He's really kind of placed himself in the line of fire between the White House and the DOJ and his workforce. There's been a lot of memos going back and forth between the Hoover Building and Main Justice across the street, and Driscoll's kind of, forwarding it to the staff and saying, "Here's what they're saying. Be aware, take care of yourself." We'll see. I mean, Driscoll, as I'm going to say 99.9% of the people in the country hadn't heard of him until 2 weeks ago. But before he was named SAC in Newark, he was head of the tactical operations section, I believe, in at Quantico, which also controls the hostage rescue team. Goes by the name the Driz, as his friends call him. But yeah, and that in the 2 weeks that I've known who he is, he's earned my utmost respect. I'm honestly surprised he's still where he is. Acting directors are one of those things. It's like, okay, bye. If you give me any kind of pushback whatsoever. Um, so as of recently, I think it was earlier this week, um, de- the Bureau did hand over details of 5,000 employees connected to January 6th, connected to the January 6th investigations were submitted to the White House, including ID numbers, job titles, and roles in the investigations, but not names. So the Bureau, to put that in perspective, the Bureau has 13,000 agents and 38,000 total employees. So I don't know. I mean, FBI agents don't get to pick what cases they're on.
No.
Again, I go back to what did the acting DAG say? They're not going to come after. They're not coming after people who acted in an ethical manner. Only those with corrupt or partisan intent. Again, I really don't know that we all have the same definitions of those two things right now. However, it kind of seems an obvious point to make, and sorry if this sounds too partisan to some, but you cannot fire 5,000 people across the FBI without inviting catastrophic consequences for our national security.
Well, yeah, this is it. My first question has been, how does this impact the important work of the FBI, which is counterterrorism, counterintelligence, organized crime, and so on? This is hugely disruptive. Hugely.
It's more than that. It's fraud. It's white collar crime. It's serial killers. It's people who commit all kinds of horrific abuses against children. It's, as you said, it's terrorist groups. It's foreign spies. It's it's weapons of mass destruction that they protect against. Their use within the United States. This is serious shit.
It is.
Deeply, deeply serious shit.
Yeah, you can't get more serious than this. I mean, I just heard yesterday of reports there was an FBI agent who was working on identifying the bodies at the Potomac crash, and they were pulled away and called back to the office so they could fill in one of these questionnaires regarding whether they'd been involved in the January 6th investigation.
Right, that's what the priority is right now.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So, and I think it's pretty appalling that this administration are playing politics with the FBI and the Justice Department in the way they are. Now, yesterday, I was watching. Have you heard of Dog Shirt TV on YouTube? It's Benjamin Wittis's new channel.
No,
I think it's the same channel as in lieu of fun, but it's been renamed Dog Shirt TV.
I was unaware that he had that. No.
Yeah, so every morning he now runs an episode. So I think, I think it would have aired by now. But anyway, I happened to be watching it yesterday, and Shane Harris popped up. I was like, oh my goodness. And he was talking a little bit about this, and some interesting stuff came up. So Shane mentioned yesterday that at the CIA, they've just had a similar fork in the road memo, which is the type of memo that was sent to the FBI.
NSA got one too.
Yeah, and it's been offering employees the opportunity to leave with a buyout. Now, it's not clear. So Shane was saying it's not clear if there's an actual inventory going on with this, tracking who is leaving. Because are there employees who the CIA don't want to retire? Is anybody keeping track of that? It doesn't appear to be that anybody is. And he was saying it seems a bit like a sledgehammer approach to downsizing the workforce without care of how it affects the mission of the CIA and the FBI. He believes the objective is to give people who don't want to work under Trump the opportunity to leave. The goal would then, he believes, be then to replace those people with new people who are more ideologically aligned with the Trump administration. Shane thinks this order is all designed to facilitate this. He also said that the CIA and FBI have been asked to identify employees on a probationary period, possibly to remove them as well. Right. Shane believes the Trump administration largely believes anyone who joined the CIA or FBI in the last 4 years did so for pro-Biden ideological reasons. So he is saying he believes the Trump administration sees anybody who joined the FBI or the CIA in the last 4 years did it because they're pro-Biden.
Shane believes that the Trump administration believes that anyone who joined these agencies in the last 4 years did it because they're pro-Biden.
Correct.
Okay.
And Shane feels the Trump administration doesn't understand the culture of these agencies that they're trying to gut, thinking that people only join for ideological reasons and not understanding that these organizations are mission-driven organizations and attract people who are interested in that mission. And so Shane sees this action as sort of short-sighted and malicious and driven by hostility towards these organizations. people at the CIA are currently afraid and nervous, and they're looking at what's happening with the FBI and wondering if this is in store for them. And this sort of culture of anxiety and nervousness is a sort of obviously a byproduct of Trump's actions, and it's unclear whether that is part of the point of them. So yeah, and then away from Shane, I saw this morning, just as I woke up this morning, that there are reports of a memo the CIA sent to the White House that has a list of probationary employees at the CIA,
Yeah.
and apparently is now largely seen as a huge counterintelligence risk because this list has names on it apparently, and foreign adversaries would love to get their hands on it.
I had some words about this on Blue Sky last night.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So back to the fork emails, the buyout offers, so to speak, I say
yeah,
in quotes. So we have some numbers floating around about how that's going. And again, just to preface, none of this is confirmed. And, any kind of official numbers coming out of OPM or the White House right now, of course, are, greatly kind of conflicted and colored, every reason to assume that. But the number that was sort of floating around that I saw, people who have taken the buyout offers, and it's basically like, if you reply to this, it's the same damn thing that happened to Twitter. Like, it's the
yeah,
same damn playbook. You reply to this email, resign, and you get permission to kind of, take like administrative leave through September. You still get your paycheck or whatever, and then, you're just gone, right? Um, so far, it's thought the number that's floating around is 20,000 people that have taken that buyout offer, which is 1% of the federal workforce. To put that in perspective, apparently, the kind of regular turnover, like the churn of the federal workforce normally per month
mm,
is about 6,000 people,
mm,
right? These are the entire federal government. Huge, right? All over the country. Um, so in perspective, I think 20,000 as opposed to 6,000
mm,
right now, I think is not. I honestly think that's a fairly good sign. And apparently, a lot of the folks from federal employees who were inside, who know their colleagues and know what they're thinking and know what they're doing. A lot of the people who are taking the buyout offer are probationary employees, so people who were there less than a year, right? Who are, fairly young, perhaps in their, 20s or early 30s. And they're like, yeah, do I want to, stick around here for a bit? No, maybe I'll just dip out. Or people, there's at least one that I know of, specifically that this is the
yeah,
case with this person, who is able to retire and, kind of was kind of at the end anyway. And said, yeah, okay, I'm just gonna walk. I don't really want to deal with it. And that's kind of understandable. And I think if you take those considerations, I think it's kind of easy to get to 20,000, like a lot of people who would have left over the course of this year anyway, right? Got that email and go, oh, okay, I'll just leave now,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
So we'll see. It also seems like the guys at the top at OPM and everything, the Office of Personnel Management, aren't too happy that it's only 20,000. Apparently there's a lot of like reminder emails and stuff. Like, don't forget, like the deadline's coming up. I think it's
yeah,
Friday, right? The
mm,
8th or Saturday or something where the deadline is supposed to be. They're like extending it, and sending more emails like, hey, this is good. You should do it. And apparently the chatter amongst, federal employees is like, if you have a really good deal to offer someone, you don't spam their inbox, inbox telling them how great the deal is. So what happens then when they don't get the attrition rates, when they don't get the resignations that they wanted, do they just start, chopping heads off? I don't know.
it's a good
Um,
question. And how does this, yeah, how does this affect people's sort of like pensions and things for older employees and stuff? That's
that's also a good question. I would sure if I was in their position and one of these people that were coming up close to retirement age and thought maybe I should just leave now. I would definitely want to talk to a lawyer and be damn sure that
mm,
I'm not going to get screwed in the long run. Again, look at Twitter. Look at the playbook that happened with a lot of people who work there.
mm,
It's kind of very disturbing. Um, the one thing I can say going back to as far as with the um, FBI and stuff. Y you can fire 5,000 of them if you want, but you will find out.
yeah.
we're all going to find out. You will find out if you do that, and bags are going to be in your hands.
And the FBI have incredibly high standards for the people they hire to be special agents, because I found that out on the FBI tour not long ago. And I think, if I remember correctly, out of all the people who apply and go through Quantico, only like 5% actually graduate.
And it's the FBI. It's a bunch of white conservative men traditionally, right? That's kind of the image associated with the FBI. That's who's there. That's who does that job. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna find out.
Yeah, indeed. Well, no, it's disturbing because it feels like, obviously, there's a purge going on, and it feels like Trump is attempting to replace the people who leave with people who are more ideologically aligned. So, the FBI, CIA, etc., are supposed to be apolitical organizations, and generally, from the people we've spoken to, they are. Obviously, there's no individual is completely apolitical. We've seen examples of people blowing off steam through like WhatsApp messages, etc.
Right.
But generally, it doesn't affect the work. Yeah.
Well, to speak to that, like, the people who work there they're still human beings. They're still American citizens. They're allowed to have thoughts and opinions, and they're allowed to, on election day, go and fill out their ballot and vote for whomever they choose, right? But when you take one of those jobs, when you take that oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, not to any one man, to the Constitution of the United States, you have to partition that part of you, and when you go to work, you do your job, and you're a civil servant, and you're there to serve the country, to defend the country, and you're not there with an R or a D next to your name. That's not how it is. And I think, by and large, the overwhelming majority of people in all of those agencies, it's exact that it is a almost religious belief for them.
Yeah, indeed. The only thing I would add, there's a sort of note of irony slightly, is obviously, in the build up to Trump's first election, there were reports of certain FBI officers being a bit pro-Trump, because typically people from law enforcement tend to swing Republican. And I'll be
New
interested.
York field office.
Yeah, New York field office, and was it Charles McGonigal, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was he was head of the counterintelligence division of the New York field office, and he was kind of in bed with some oligarchs and stuff. But
so I don't know how that so it's I don't know, just feels slightly ironic that they're now targeting an agency that supposedly is filled with a lot of Republicans. But we'll see. We will see. But yeah,
I think just one more point on that before we move on. I think the lawfare that we're going to see coming up soon is going to be quite epic. I don't know epic in which way, in the Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi kind of way. I don't know, but there's a bunch of lawsuits bubbling up. At the FBI, the Agents Association is kind of getting ready. There's different federal employees unions that are there's going to be some serious litigation and court cases coming up. Where those go, how those outcomes are respected or not, I don't know.
Well, another friend of the podcast, Mark Zaid, I believe, is a very busy man at the moment.
Yes, he is.
Because his name's come up a few times in reports I've been reading. So I doubt we'll be getting him back on the podcast anytime soon.
No, he's got a job to do.
So but no, I'm because like the FBI, etc., have unions like the police do, and so far they've been kind of quiet. But I'm assuming it's because they're getting ready to make a proper announcement. I don't think it's just they're doing nothing. I think it's just we haven't heard yet what's going to be the response to this. But I can't believe that they're going to take this lying down. So we will see how this goes. But honestly, this is so disruptive, so dangerous, totally unnecessary, and yet it's happening. So so there we go. Well, let's take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. So, our next story is about Russia reportedly refusing to extradite Assad to Syria. So, Matt, you brought this one up. So I'll hand this over to you.
Yeah, very interesting story here that just bubbled up. So yeah, the Kremlin is allegedly refusing to, the Kremlin is refusing to comment on reports that Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, has requested Bashar al-Assad's extradition in exchange for Russia retaining its military bases in Syria. Russian officials recently visited Damascus for the first time since Assad's ouster in December, but Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov remained tight-lipped on the matter. The new Syrian government is pressing Moscow to rebuild trust by providing compensation and aiding in reconstruction efforts. Russia had long supported Assad through military intervention, including heavy bombing campaigns that shifted the tide of Syria's civil war in his favor until December. However, Russia's position in Syria is now uncertain. Satellite imagery indicates that Russian forces have been withdrawing assets to Libya, and Syria recently revoked Russia's 49-year lease on the Tartus naval base, previously a key hub for Moscow's influence in the Middle East. What do you think? We just alluded to something quite like this last week.
Yeah, we did actually. Yeah, we did. Well, I think from Russia's point of view, despite the benefits of giving up Assad territorially, the benefits, I think the Russians be very reluctant to do so because they want to maintain a reputation of reliability and looking after their allies. And despite my negative feelings towards Russia's political actions, both during the Cold War and, should we say, the post-Cold War reality we're in now, Russia has generally been quite good at looking after those who work for them. Even when things get tough, they tend to only turn on people such as Yevgeny Prigozhin, RIP,
May he rest in
when
peace.
they turn against the Russian government and cause embarrassment.
Why is it so hot down there?
Yeah, it probably is still hot down there. Oh my goodness. So if you think of all the Cold War traitors they looked after who they easily could have returned in a spy swap or an extradition request for political advantages, they chose not to do so. Also, the lack of true democracy in Russia leads to a kind of continuity of government and policies that last for decades, which are a bit different, obviously, to then the United States. So Russia's relationship does tend to be more stable with their allies than, should we say, America's sometimes. And I believe that Putin understands that if he's to persuade people to work for him and his government's interests, there has to be a sense of protection that will never be violated. Also, we said last week, Putin is more focused on Ukraine at the moment, and he sees that as of greater strategic importance than the bases in Syria. And he possibly believes in time, post a victory in Ukraine, that he can re-establish those bases. And if the US continues on its path of either isolating itself or turning on allies, the new Syrian government in time may even turn back to Russia for support and trade, whether they turn Assad over or not. So I feel like Russia, I think they've got more to gain by holding on to him than not. Those are really sort of my thoughts on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought this was a highly interesting because we, discussed essentially this exact scenario
Yeah.
on the podcast last week as a
Mm.
way Russia could theoretically attempt to carry favor with the new government and retain some influence in Damascus. Like what's a lever you could offer? What's what could you give them to grease the wheels a bit? Um, Assad is of course the ace of spades on the Syrians' most wanted list on their deck of cards, if you remember those from way back in the day. He's definitely, I think it's safe to say, much too high profile and important to Putin for him to be handed over. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I would eat my shoe if that happened.
Mm.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that on recording, but anyway, you never know with the way
Yeah.
this year's going. It'll be a huge diplomatic embarrassment, and a hit to the Russians' credibility, as you've said. They usually are pretty good to their own, the people who sort of pledge fealty to them in some way. Even if they got an air base and an access to a Mediterranean port out of the deal. However, that doesn't mean that they couldn't offer a queen or a jack from that deck of cards, maybe. There's quite a few major regime officials who fled Damascus and are in hiding somewhere. Some are suspected to be probably in Syrian Alawite villages in the sort of mountain regions and kind of the western part of the country, kind of near the coast. Some are thought to be in Beirut. Some could be in Tehran. Some could be in Moscow. So some of the big ones that are kind of in the wind right now. Minister of Defense Ali Mahmoud Abbas, the Interior Minister, Mohammed Khalid Al Rahmoun, the Chief of the General Staff, Abdul Karim Mahmoud Ibrahim, the head of the National Security Office, Kifa Mulim, and the Deputy Vice President for Security Affairs, Ali Mamlouk, is thought to be in Beirut under Hezbollah's protection. Assad's brother, Maher al Assad, he was the commander of the 4th Armored Division, utter psychopath. Famously has tortured and murdered people by his own hands, and apparently took quite a lot of pleasure in doing so. He could be in Moscow or Tehran. Maher al-Assad might be like, if you're to pick one, who would the Syrians would love to get their hands on that man and hold him responsible. That isn't the big guy. That isn't Bashar al-Assad. Yeah, Maher would be quite the nice gift for the Syrians if you're Putin and you wanted to sort of curry favor there and retain some kind of influence. Khmeimim Air Base, their main base in Syria, became a major force projection platform for Russian operations into Africa. Similar how Ramstein supports logistics for U.S. forces throughout the Middle East and Asia, not just Europe. So it's very important for them, for the Russians, to retain some role there, some presence there, if they can. It wouldn't totally shock me if they did end up giving someone over, someone who is known to have personally committed war crimes like himself by his own hands, to say, hey, we don't stand for that. Like, we wanted Assad to stay in power. Like, we didn't want him overthrown by like a unlawful kind of uprising. They would frame it that way, right? But hey, we don't support all this blatant torture and murder, which we know, of course, is quite abject nonsense, considering what they actually did in Syria and Ukraine and all that. But it's possible.
Yeah, definitely. It makes sense to be a bad time to be a kind of middle manager of the former Assad government, because, they would make a perfect gift, really. Yeah. There's one extra note I was just going to give, actually. So is it Khmeimim Air Base?
Mm-hmm.
There's a really interesting video I found for 2 Espresso Martinis ago, which I didn't mention in the end, but it's called Combat Approved, and it kind of gives you a look at life on the base and its operations from a Russian perspective, and their role in the Syrian campaign, as they called it. And apparently the best tool for fighting terrorism is, to quote the video, the good old air bomb. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that video. It's well worth. It's very jingoistic. It is obviously, it's Russian, but mainly in the English language. So I'm not quite sure who the audience was for this video. Probably a Western audience. But it did provide a bit of insight into what the Russians were up to in Syria and how they kind of supported the regime there. And then, the Russians obviously do have an interest in that area, because they still, have ships and things that are kind of keeping an eye on things. And there was a reported fire on a spy ship called Kalidin just off the coast of Syria this week. And one of the key points that sort of came out about this fire is it's sort of highlighting how a lot of the Russian equipment is old and poorly maintained, and the ship itself, the Kalidin, is actually a 55-year-old ship that was actually built in Poland when it was occupied by the Soviet Union. And it's not the first ship the Russians have nearly lost to a fire, because they had the Moskova, which sank after an attack by the Ukrainians. A lot of naval experts believe that the reason the ship sank was actually for the lack of fire control on the ship, and sort of poor, just basically poor training on the part of the Russian naval officers and crew on the ship. So the ship probably could have survived the attack had they put out the fires. So Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things going on with Russia at the moment, and regards to their sort of various fleets. The only thing that I do know, with regards to Russian sort of naval activity, etc., at the moment is they seem to be putting a lot of effort towards submarines. That seems to be where Putin's focus is.
That's always been the heart and soul of the
Yeah.
Russian Navy, even going back to the Soviets. Their submarine force was always much more capable, and the resources pumped in there were much greater than their surface fleet. I mean, that's the submarine force is also the backbone of their nuclear arsenal.
Mm.
I mean, that's a key national asset. If that goes down,
Yeah.
they got nothing.
Exactly, exactly. It's kind of it's how they do gunboat diplomacy effectively, but just without a gunboat, it's just with the sub. So yeah, no, a big part of their defense there. And submarines, in many respects, you don't need that many to be effective. They just need to be able to evade being detected. That's the main thing.
Mhm.
And also on top of that, they need to be able to detect hostile submarines. So yeah, so we can see why, like we were saying last week about this undersea mapping is very important at the moment with these spy ships. And so, yeah, the Culloden being off the coast of Syria does not surprise me in the slightest. And obviously, they were keeping an eye, probably scooping up electronic data, like radio signals, etc., to kind of find out what might be happening to their bases, because their bases at that time were under threat. I think they've largely evacuated all the bases and have a very reduced presence there right now.
Right. Well, they had uh, essentially, yeah, they pretty much cut a deal with HTS to, you know, spare their forces there, to spare their bases. So they weren't under like, I don't think they were ever going to be under threat of like command beam coming under attack or something. But
No.
yeah, it's a serious situation there for them. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Yeah, so Matt, you got picked up this story about Iran might be looking to build a nuclear weapon again.
Yeah, there's a story that popped up in the New York Times recently that really kind of saw the headline. It's like, whoa, wait,
Mm.
what? New U.S. intelligence suggests that Iranian scientists are exploring a more rapid but less sophisticated pathway to building a nuclear weapon. Should Tehran decide to cross that threshold, this approach would allow Iran to develop a functional nuclear device in months rather than years. Though the weapon would be rudimentary and unlikely to be mounted on a ballistic missile. The intelligence gathered in the final months of the Biden administration and relayed to Trump's national security team underscores growing concerns that Iran is seeking a nuclear deterrent and military setbacks. Iran's position is weaker than it has been in years. Its key proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, have suffered significant blows, and Assad's departure to Moscow has complicated Iran's regional influence. An Israeli counterstrike in October further degraded Iran's military capabilities, hitting missile defense systems and disrupting its ballistic missile production infrastructure. Against this backdrop, Iran's leadership appears divided. President Masoud Pezeshkian has expressed interest in renewed diplomatic negotiations. It's not really up to him. Spoiler. I mean, I could say that I'm up for renewed negotiations. It doesn't matter. It's not his decision. Be up to the supreme leader in the IRGC. But experts believe he and Iran's foreign ministry are largely unaware of the Revolutionary Guard's covert nuclear activities. Despite having enough enriched uranium to produce multiple bombs, Iran still faces technical challenges in weaponizing its nuclear material. Historically, U.S. and Israeli intelligence have estimated that it would take at least a year to develop a deployable warhead, but the new assessment suggests Iran may opt for a crude device, possibly based on blueprints from Pakistani scientist A.Q. Khan. While such a weapon would not be an immediate offensive threat, it could serve as a deterrent, potentially altering strategic calculations in Washington, Jerusalem, and beyond. Chris, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I think I've said this before. I'm of the opinion that the Iranian regime is much more fragile than it appears, and this could explain their drive to develop a nuclear weapon, which they might see as essential for preventing an attack by Israel, the US. A nuclear a nuclear armed Iran could be a direct threat to Israel, of course, but what's worse is it could set off a kind of nuclear arms race in the Middle East, and I think Sunni countries such as Saudi Arabia would not tolerate a Shia Iran having such a devastating weapon in their arsenal, especially if they have nothing to match it. So that could be, I think that's one of the big fears at the moment, is this sort of nuclear arms race kicking off in the Middle East, which I think most administrations have been trying to prevent. It's been reported that President Trump has said he wants a verified nuclear peace agreement with Iran, and he's denied that he wants to blow Iran to smithereens, describing such reports as greatly exaggerated. But we will see. Could this mean we see some blusters and threats to Iran before negotiations, or will America with Israel get involved in some joint airstrikes and other measures to target Iran's nuclear ambitions? I'm not sure at this point. Trump appears to like to present himself as this sort of wild card. He makes a lot of statements.
Right.
Some appear, and some of those do appear to upset allies. And then he kind of settles on a path of action, and we've seen such statements about how he'd like the US to take over Gaza, which are now kind of being walked back. But since then, those comments have kind of inflamed anti-American sentiment and caused a lot of concern with strategic allies. So I don't know whether the US would consider, where the US sort of stands with Iran at the moment, but I know it's been a very traditional kind of talking point in Republican circles that they don't want a nuclear armed Iran. And I think that the US would be possibly willing to, help Israel and take some action against strategic sites and things with airstrikes. And, we've already talked a little bit about how they have worked with Israel on a lot of these things. So I don't know. Only time will tell, really, on this issue with what's going to happen next. I don't know.
Yeah. Let me give us some perspective here and take us back a few years and kind of walk us back up to the moment that we're in. So this is just a side note. This is a really interesting story for me because the crux of my active measure series, the first book in the series, which has been out for many years, too many years, and been working on the second one for way too long, but they're very big, complicated books. The crux is in the first chapter, a parallel covert Iranian nuclear weapons program is discovered. And the whole point of it is they're sort of making a smaller, cruder nuclear
Mm,
weapon that they could do much faster and much quieter. So this was, this is kind of familiar ground for me. So the estimate right now is that it would take only days for Iran to enrich its uranium stockpile up to and above 90%, right? Which is the threshold needed for use in a bomb. However, it's estimated that it'd take another year to 18 months to marry that fissile material with a functioning warhead, right? That you could
yeah.
use as a weapon. Iran would be attacked within that window. They couldn't hide that push to 90% enrichment. The only thing that would mean is that they are actively proceeding ahead with a weapon, and they would be attacked. That's just a fact. The through line, though, on the question of Iran's intent for its nuclear program has largely remained constant for like 20 years, going back to 2003. And this was confirmed essentially in 2018 when Mossad broke into this warehouse and stole like 100,000 documents on Iran's nuclear program. And it like demonstrated like, yes, they did. This is exactly what they were doing the whole time, right? So in 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei shelved the nuclear weapons program side of Iran's nuclear program. Wanted to move ahead with the civilian power side, but the weapons program was shelved. So since that time, the Supreme Leader hasn't ordered the production of a bomb, but he would like to keep the option open and thus needs to maintain the industrial base, the scientific and engineering expertise, and a usable stockpile of fissile material, which is, highly enriched uranium or weapons-grade plutonium. So after 2013, much of that work was shifted to studying and developing the other components that go into a bomb, like the conventional explosive lenses that are shaped around the plutonium core in an implosion type nuclear weapon. So that was like Fat Man, the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, was an implosion type design. The Trinity gadget was an implosion type design. And if anyone's seen Oppenheimer, fantastic movie, if you haven't, go see it. There's a scene where you can see them like fitting in these explosive lenses onto the Trinity gadget at Los Alamos ahead of the test. That step is key because if there's even the slightest fault in the fabrication or placement of just one of these lenses, or even if the millisecond that they all fire is just a little bit off, you don't get a supercritical mass. There's no fission, the bomb's a dud, and you've wasted years of incredibly valuable plutonium. And that was a serious concern during the Manhattan Project when they were gearing up for Trinity. Like if this thing fails to get a supercritical mass, we've just wasted years of all this plutonium production. Like we're basically back at square one if this goes wrong. Like, right? Those were the stakes there. The same equipment and technical know-how needed to produce those explosive lenses, which have to be milled to such like exact precision and specification, can be used in the production of things like nanodiamonds or even like eyeglasses, more simply, right? You think like the lenses in an eyeglass in eyeglasses have to be, very kind of like specific to meet the prescription and everything, right? So you can still make progress in that area without actively developing a bomb. It also gives you a degree of deniability. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, before Mossad assassinated him in 2020 with that remotely operated machine gun.
It's very Breaking Bad, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So he was a professor at Imam Hussein University in Tehran. He also led the Organization for Defensive Innovation and Research, which is essentially like Iran's DARPA. He was supposed to be their Robert Oppenheimer. And he was working on stuff like that in that period between 2003 and his death in 2020, for the most part. So he was doing his research. He was, still kind of working on stuff that could be used for a bomb, but not actually building a bomb. He was waiting for the supreme leader to call and say, hey, it's time. So to answer the question there about what we're seeing right now, reading this report in the Times, just, looking at what's there, that's all I got to go on right now. This honestly doesn't seem like cause for great alarm. I know like the headline is like Iran's pushing to build a new crude small nuclear weapon. They're going to do it. I don't.
You say that for years, really.
They've been saying that for 20 years. Exactly. That's not to brush it off. It's not to suggest that it's a serious thing that we need to guard against and we need to be kind of proactive in monitoring it. But there's been a lot of moments of alarm that, in all that time, like I said, that constant through line has stayed the same. They want the option to build a bomb. They have not made the decision to build one, right? That's always been like that since 2003. So the sourcing in the article is sort of fuzzy. I do find it a little bit sus that this drops right when Bibi comes to visit Trump. A lot of folks in Israel are saying, now's our, as you kind of alluded to, now's our time to finish off the nuclear program. And they're technically even objectively correct. I got to say, Iran's ability to respond to such an attack is a shadow of what it would have been 18 months ago. But there aren't any details on what this crude, hastily assembled bomb would use. And that's sort of another interesting open question for me that I would really like to know about more. I mentioned, they may perhaps use designs they got from AQ Khan, the Pakistani nuclear scientist who operated like a black market for nuclear materials in the early 2000s. That somewhat to me points to a implosion type weapon. It's just sort of my gut. If they are using an AQ Khan design, perhaps, but again, totally speculating there. The article doesn't say. But this isn't an area where you want to cut corners either, or again, you're going to get a dud, or at least you're going to irradiate all of your scientists and engineers. You don't want to do that. They're really valuable. They're almost as valuable as a fissile material. It honestly seems like intelligence indicated these discussions are happening in Tehran right now, right? Perhaps like a SIGINT intercept or something, that like they're talking about this. They're asking questions on whether such a thing is technically feasible for them, and it may be, but it wouldn't be of much strategic value or dig themselves, I think, out of the hole that they're in now after Hezbollah and Assad's defeat. So, um, let's say they do slap together a bomb of a couple kiloton yield, right? So it's fairly small boom for a nuke, but it's physically too large to place atop a ballistic missile. So how do you deploy it? Iran has no strategic bombers. You can put it in the back of you could put it in a cargo plane and roll it down the back of a ramp, but you're not getting it anywhere near Tel Aviv, right? So you have to then smuggle it to your target if you do intend to use it, right? Which also, again, is a huge assumption, right? That they would build it and then want to use it, right? That's just saying that for conversation, right? For conversation's sake. Like, let's say they build this thing and they want to use it. How do you get it to target? You don't have a missile to put it on. You can't deliver it by aircraft. You have to smuggle it in illicitly somehow. But keep in mind, the package that this bomb is in is still pretty big because it's too big to put on a missile, right? So in this whole time then that you're trying to smuggle it to your target, it's still bleeding gamma rays and neutron emissions, and they can shield that with lead or tungsten, but I wouldn't want to bet that we haven't developed classified countermeasures to detect that stuff.
Got the nuke sniffer, haven't you?
Right. Yeah. Chances are good, I think, that it would be detected and interdicted, and then they're really screwed. So, and then let's also say, as the time suggests, that they opt to test fire one in the desert as a demonstration, right? And then announce that they're a nuclear power. Still, now they're still screwed. Now they're an international pariah, and they get obliterated by Israel and or the U.S., the U.K., France, the Gulf Arabs, probably. Now they're not a nuclear power anymore, and the regime's gone. So again, absent further evidence, I think these are discussions that are certainly happening in Tehran, options that are being further explored in theory. It'd be strange for them not to, honestly, to look into exploring this after the year that they just had. It's like, what do we do? Okay, can we build a bomb? How do we build a bomb fast? Okay, it's got to be crude. Okay, we could technically build a small crude nuclear weapon, but then what do we do with it? Right? Like it doesn't get you anything, I remember having this conversation with Philip Smythe in one of our episodes a few months back. Like a nuclear weapon doesn't allow you to project force on the ground into Syria. It doesn't allow you to rearm Hezbollah. It doesn't answer those questions for them. At the end of the day, I don't think it's likely that they're about to race toward a bomb, because given the circumstances, I don't see what they gain from it in doing it in this manner. So that's a very long-winded way to say, calm down.
I have a dumb question.
Sure.
Because I'm not totally up on nuclear missiles and bombs. It's sort of my weak point at this point. But you remember the whole thing about dirty bombs, where basically you have a collection of radioactive material that you attach to an explosive and set it off. Is there anything stopping them from shoving a load of radioactive material into a conventional or a number of conventional rockets with the intention of them being shot down or crashed, just so they spread radioactive material across Israel? Could that happen?
I want to say no. There isn't anything stopping them from doing that. I mean, could you take some lower enriched uranium is still radioactive. You can still use that in kind of a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb, if you want to call it that. Yeah, could you put that into a payload of a missile? Marry it to the conventional HE explosives, or take out the HE explosives and just put in any kind of radioactive material. Yeah, they could do that now. It would still end in their destruction.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, if they felt that this was I don't know, whatever scenario, they would decide to do this. But I remember when the rocket attacks that happened last year, I remember seeing a picture of a man posing next to one of these rockets, and I thought, well, It could have had something biological or nuclear in it for all he
Right.
knew at that point. I wouldn't stand next to a recently downed rocket from Iran until at least somebody had checked it out to check it was safe. But yeah.
The other thing to consider then in that scenario is, right,
Mm,
so you don't have, if you're Iran, you don't have a ton of fissile material anyway. You have enough to produce a couple bombs, but you don't have tons of it to just, lob off into the atmosphere and it lands wherever it lands, right? It's still pretty valuable material. If you were going to use it, again, for sake of conversation, if you were going to use it as a kind of makeshift dirty bomb, you would want to be pretty damn sure that it's going to hit the target that you want it to hit, right? So look at the exchange of missiles back and forth between Iran and Israel over the last year, right?
mm,
They
mm,
fired off hundreds, thousands of even of missiles and drones. At best, a handful made it to Israel, right? So if you have your precious national asset stockpile of highly enriched uranium that you've spent billions of dollars and all kinds of scientific effort, decades amassing this material, are you going to put it into a missile and launch it up into the atmosphere for it to probably get shot down and land in Iraq or Jordan or something
mm.
and not even hit Israel? Like, what do you gain from that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're going to
Good.
get destroyed anyway because you just launched a dirty bomb that landed in Jordan.
Either way, it never ends well for Iran.
No, that's the thing here. Like, I mean, yeah, they technically could do this, but I don't know I don't see how that's an answer to their problem. So I don't know why they would do it.
No. Hence why they have the proxy forces to do stuff instead.
Exactly. The proxy forces, honestly, and this is a point that, Philip and I were kind of making, the proxy forces are arguably more valuable for their ability to project force across the Middle East than a nuclear bomb would be.
Makes a lot of sense.
So that's what I think about that.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. I think, yeah, it's a lot of food for thought with Iran. I think there's no need to press the panic button just yet. No doubt President Trump will be pressing the Diet Coke button instead. But there we go. So we will see what happens over the next few weeks with regards to US and Israel action on Iran. But, yeah, I just hope calm heads prevail, not hot heads, because obviously there's been a lot of Republicans and the political right in Israel have been very vocal against Iran. And some have been very keen for military action to topple the regime. And I think that would be a very dangerous course. And I don't think there's any real need for it because it doesn't appear like the nuclear situation is as bad as maybe some people might believe. So,
yeah. Hey, can I just say one more thing to that point
of
about, I mean, I'm
course.
sure there's people listening here saying, okay, well, does that mean Trump's going to, bomb Iran now or something? Or is he going to let Bibi do it or whatever? I think I'm not going to pretend to know what goes on in that man's head from minute to minute, or what he definitely will or won't do. I have no idea, right?
And I think he likes it that way too.
He definitely does. That's his madman theory thing that he does.
Mm.
I think his instinct, and you can see this, right? His underlying instinct is to avoid big military conflict, especially that involves large committed numbers of US troops, because it makes for bad television. Americans don't like to see bad, scary stuff on their TV screens. We saw that all last year, right? Like, I just don't want to see it. Like, this is upsetting me. I don't want to see it. He knows that, right? So he's hesitant to create a situation that would produce those images, right? Now, again, I'm sure there's people screaming, what about him saying we're just going to take Gaza? Now,
Well, yeah,
or the Panama Canal or something, or Greenland or whatever.
Greenland, Canada.
Yes.
It's been a busy 3 weeks nearly.
Correct. I agree. The ideological consistency is not there, and the sheer proposal of wanting to do those things, even if it's just, out of his head randomly, right, is still very diplomatically damaging and not good and bad. And maybe we'll talk more about that next week. But he does not see the US taking Gaza or the Panama Canal or Greenland as a war. He thinks that, like, they're just going to give it to us because we're so awesome, and he's going to yell at them enough until they just do it. He doesn't think it would involve a war to do such a thing, right? Taking out Iran's nuclear program would involve at least some level of serious military action.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think it's an important thing to, like, if you must, I know it's not anywhere near Halloween, if you must put yourself in his head, he does not see taking Gaza as a war, right?
Mm.
And that's where I think that, blatant, yes, hypocrisy, ideological disconnect, stupidity, even perhaps you could say, that's real and that's where that comes from. But he does not see it as a war. And I think that's, to him, that's completely ideologically consistent.
Yeah, indeed,
It's just
indeed.
his psychology.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And no, we'll maybe talk about Gaza next week, because at the moment, I mean, the White House have walked back the comments now, but so I
Yeah.
don't know really what's going on with it. Because he brought it twice, he's mentioned it now, and I was hesitant to do a piece on it today, because it's just, frankly, at the moment, with regards to Trump, there's a lot of things being said, but
I know.
you've got to match it up with then action, because I think if you react to everything he says, I mean, we'll probably be on air 24/7.
I think there is something worth talking about it in terms of like the diplomatic distraction and just kind of like the chaos and uncertainty of the president of the United States standing at the White House saying, we're just going to take Gaza. And like everyone, rightfully, because the president said it, it's like, what do you mean you're going to take Gaza?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. He's
I
pissed
don't,
off every Arab ally now. He's pissed. He's caused concern for NATO, and it might even lead to an attack on an American embassy in the Middle East somewhere. Could
good.
have another Benghazi next week, for crying out
I'll say
loud. So
one
that
thing
was,
though.
mm,
If you do plan on firing hundreds or even thousands of FBI agents, occupying Gaza is not something that you want to do. Just pro tip there.
yeah, that's a very good pro tip. Yeah,
Some advice.
indeed. Yeah, no, because as we've seen over the last year, anything, Israel and Hamas's war has sparked so much emotion. So if America thinks that, oh yeah, we're going to just take Gaza, or if Trump thinks, I'm not going to say America, if Trump thinks that we're going to just walk in and take Gaza and there'll be no consequence, I think he hasn't been paying attention for the last year. So yeah, it'd be very stupid to do it. And I think most of America's allies have sort of expressed something on those terms, as politely as they can, about upsetting Trump and alienating him, because they know that that's bad for them too. But yeah, it doesn't inspire confidence, is the polite way to put it.
It most certainly does not.
No. So I think on that note, we'll hold there and we'll wrap up for today. So thank you everybody for listening. So a few things. First of all, so we've got an episode coming up on the 22nd of February. So that'll be our last episode in February. So please send in please email in any questions you have that you'd like us to read out and comment on, or are there any topics that you want to suggest that we could look at? If you do send us a topic, please send a link with it, so we can sort of see where you're coming from. Or are there any kind of comments, anything that we've talked about in the last few episodes that you'd like to air? We'll happily read them out. So just send us an
Airing of the
email.
grievances.
Well, yeah, if there's some grievances too, we can hear those too. So yeah, send us an email at secretsandspiespodcast@gmail.com. In your email, obviously include the question, topic, or comment. And again, as I say, with a topic, if you want us to look into it, please send a link with it so we can have a look. Also, please add in that email how you'd like us to read out your name, and like where you are, etc. And if you want to use a fake name, that's absolutely fine. But obviously, we'd prefer it if you're as honest as you can be, but we could just use a first name. Up to you how you want to do that, but just let us know, and then we'll read it out accordingly. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Blue Sky. That's where we are these days mainly. Yeah, so we're just at Blue Sky, so it's I'm not even going to read that out, but if you just go to Secrets and Spies, if you type in Secrets and Spies into Blue Sky, you'll find us, and there's links in the show notes. We're also on Instagram at Secrets and Spies, Facebook and Spoutable. We've been having some comments on Facebook actually lately. I generally, forgive me, I'm just not the biggest Facebook fan, but
Yeah,
we've been
me
getting
neither.
some comments here and there, so I've been doing my best when I spot them to respond to those. So thank you for those comments for those who do follow us on Facebook, and I apologize for it being neglected. You can also follow myself and Matt on Blue Sky. We both have our own personal accounts that link to there. If you want to experience this podcast ad-free, please go to patreon.com/secrets and spies, and you can get ad-free versions of these episodes. Also, I don't know if many people know this because we've only ever had a very small number of sales, but we do have a Redbubble merchandise store. There's
Yeah, we don't
also
really
a
talk
link
about
in the
it.
show notes, and you can get T-shirts, cups, water bottles. For some reason, we sold a few water bottles. Even I don't have a Secrets and Spies water bottle, but some
I don't
people
have a
out there
water
do.
bottle. I didn't know we had
No.
water bottles.
Yeah, we have water bottles.
What
Yeah,
the
and
hell,
tote
dude?
bags. Yeah,
What
there's
the
tote
hell?
bags.
Damn.
There's one tote bag in the Middle East. I can tell you that now. So somebody out there is walking around with Secrets and Spies bag, but there we go.
There's
Yeah.
a copy of my novel. This is courtesy of Philip Smythe. There's a copy of my novel that was, at least for a while, I don't know if it still is, was in the office of the commander of the Bahrain police force, I
Oh
think.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Hope
There
you
we
liked
go.
it.
It's always fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's always interesting that. So yeah, no, that's really cool. So no, good. So yeah, so please and finally, obviously, if you don't want to do Patreon, buy merchandise, etc., that's absolutely fine. What I do ask, please share this episode. If you find value in the podcast, please share it, because the more people you share it to, the more people will come across this podcast. And one last thing, earlier this week, I got an email from the founder of FeedSpot, and Secrets and Spies is currently at number 3 in the top 10 spy podcasts on the FeedSpot website.
That's cool.
It's very cool. So we've been on this chart before, but we've usually been at like the after 10, beyond 10, like at 15, 20. But ahead of us is Spycast at number 1, and well earned. Spycast is definitely the number 1 sort of spy podcast out there. And then number 2 is our friends at Spy Hards, which is the movie podcast, and I've been on there a couple of times as well as a guest. But then here we are at number 3, and I'm really pleased with that. It's really nice to be in the chart and to be, should we say, the only other factual podcast below Spycast. I was like, wow, that's really, puts us in a very interesting place. But no, great honor. So thank you very much to FeedSpot for including us in your chart there. I have no idea how they kind of compute it, etc., and figure out how that works. But I'm honored. So thank you very much for that. So that is us done for this week. So thank you again, everybody, for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch you next week. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.